Welcome to the Working on Wellbeing podcast. I am your host, Sarah Cunningham, and I am passionate about the science behind how we can all work on our well-being. That's how I came to lead the World Wellbeing Movement, a non-profit social impact organisation housed within the University of Oxford's Wellbeing Research Centre. In short, our mission is to improve the quality of people's life across the world by connecting wellbeing experts with those people who can have the biggest impact, so with business leaders and policymakers. And through my work, I get to meet the most incredible people. That's why we've created this podcast, so that you can be a fly on the wall during my conversations with the world's leading wellbeing experts. In today's episode, we'll hear actionable tips that business leaders and employees alike can employ when facing unexpected workplace challenges. And we'll discuss what we can all do to create a less stressful future of work. And I'm delighted to be joined today by the remarkable Dr. Jacqueline Brassey, or Jackie, as I believe you're known.
Correct.
So Jackie is the co-author of two recently published books, which we have here, Deliberate Calm and Authentic Confidence. You are an adjunct professor at the IE University in Madrid, and you're also the co-leader of the McKinsey Health Institute, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Well, you are very welcome. I'm delighted to have you as a guest on this podcast. And Jackie and I have met each other a few times and we've really bonded. So I'm excited for all of you to hear the incredible insights and research that Jackie has done. I feel a great place to start an interview is to ask, how are you? But there is a problem with that. And the problem with that is that all too often people give an auto-response. So they'll say, I'm fine, or I'm grand, or my favourite, confusing, positive, negative, not too bad, thanks. But I find that people never tell you the real answer. So because you are a research expert, I thought I'd ask you the way scientists would ask, the way, for instance, the Gallup World Poll or the World Happiness Report might ask. So I hope you don't mind me asking, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life nowadays?
Oh, that's a great question, Sarah. I'm pretty good. I think I would say an 8.
An 8, wow. So that's amazing. Just for context, the average response to that answer is 7. So that tells me that you're doing pretty well. And I would love for you to share some tips on how you've achieved such strong well-being as we chat throughout the course of this interview. But before we sort of jump into your research and your books, I wanted to ask you, because of course the work you do is very much focused on creating a healthier future of work where well-being really is at the core. So I'd love to know, what is the change that you want to see in the future of work? If you were to propel ourselves forward 10 or 20 years in a time machine, what's the change that you want to see?
Oh, I love that question. And I have a very clear vision about that. I really hope that organizations can be enablers for health and well-being because, we spend a lot of our time at work. And there's a huge opportunity for us to grow and develop and have positive impact and meet people and so on. And it's just wonderful if we become more fulfilled and feel enriched by the work that we do every day. And that it also creates a lot of meaning for us. So I really have that vision, organizations becoming enablers for well-being. Rather than the other side of the coin, the reducing health and reducing well-being, because there's a huge opportunity, and I think there's also a huge gap still. So
there is.
That's my vision.
I think that's a wonderful vision. Let's talk about how we can bring that vision to life. And now might be a good opportunity to talk about your book, Deliberate Calm. One of the things that I want to get out of this podcast series is that all of our listeners come away from every episode with one or two actionable tips that they can apply in their own lives and in their work. And what's fantastic about you is both of your books are packed full of actionable tips. But I thought I might start by reading a very short quote from Deliberate Calm. And this is in the context of an employee maybe facing a challenging or a difficult situation. So you describe Deliberate Calm as, it's not a leadership style or behavior. Rather, it is a personal self-mastery practice that provides leaders with the awareness and skills to avoid reacting ineffectively and instead choose the mode of thinking and acting that is most effective based on their current circumstances. Now, that's all very well, but is it that simple? Can we really choose our mode of thinking? And if we can, how? Tell me a little bit more about Deliberate Calm and maybe give me an example of Deliberate Calm in action.
Yeah, sure. And this is really at the heart of the book. So this is amazing. You picked out this quote. To answer your first question, is it that simple? Yes, it is actually relatively simple, but it is not easy. So a couple of the principles in the book that we talk about sound very simple, but then when you really need to bring them into practice, they can be extremely hard to do. And maybe you cannot choose the thoughts initially that you may have or your initial response, but you can choose actually to look at things a different way. So we talk a lot also about reframing. But at the core of Deliberate Calm, we talk about, on the one side, what does it mean, deliberate, right? That is the choice. If you become aware of a situation that you're in that may actually require you to do something else, or that asks something else from you that you initially would want to show, then in that moment you can make a choice to change how you look at it, to change your response. And at the same time, the second word, calm, is about managing the instant response that you may have. And we refer, of course, a lot of what we explain in the book applies to high-stakes situations where the stress is high. And the stress can be high in situations that are familiar or unfamiliar. And 9 out of 10, your initial reaction in high-stakes familiar situations may be fine, because actually you apply what you've learned before. You default to what you know. And that may serve the situation perfectly well.
So that's sort of like when I'm on auto drive driving to work and I forget that I somehow got from home to work. That's the auto
you've
drive.
learned that, right? You go into a part of your brain where you have a lot of the stuff that you already know, and you just pick it from the shelf there, and that's how you apply. Then the other part that we talk about is, but if you go into a high-stakes, unfamiliar situation, that's a situation that requires you to learn and adapt and not apply what you already know or what you have in your repertoire, but it requires you to change. And that is the hardest to do, because in those situations you want to go to the default mode. So actually, if you have to synthesize this book, it's about changing when change is hard.
Okay. So, and this I find really interesting. You talk about the adaptability paradox. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, that is actually what I refer to when I said, when you need to change, when change is most needed or required, that's when it's hardest to do. So I can give you an example. We start the book with a scene where Captain Sullenberger is taking off with a plane from LaGuardia Airport. There's also
so this is the movie with Tom Hanks,
there
right?
is a movie, yes. Yeah, and it's amazing. It's a very good movie, actually. So takes off, and not very long after takeoff, the plane gets struck by a bird flock. In that very moment, the engine goes off, and there's of course, the protocols come into play. Then the traffic control tower tells Captain Sullenberger, you need to go back to LaGuardia Airport. That's currently the protocol. And in that very moment, he takes the decision to not do that, to not listen, because he realizes, and there's milliseconds, but he realizes that's not going to work out. Doesn't have a lot of time to think about it, but takes the decision to land the plane on the Hudson River. Even, long story short, he lands safely. There are no casualties, nobody dies. But they looked at it afterwards, and there was a huge challenge also for him. Why did he do that? And he put people in danger. But at that very moment, the protocol that was put into play was applicable to when one engine gets out. But actually, in that situation, 2 engines were out. He would never have been able to return to LaGuardia Airport.
Wow.
Now, that's a situation, people may say, I don't identify with that because I'm not Captain Sullenberger and so on. But, that's a very clear, extreme situation, very high stakes, very unfamiliar, of deliberate calm in action. And we have many versions of those during the day, but also in the businesses that we work at currently, if you look at where we are, right? Yeah. After the pandemic and the accelerating change and the VUCA world and so on, we constantly need to learn and adapt. But it's very hard if we are in high-stakes situations. That's just how our brains work.
I think that's an absolutely wonderful example. And I did watch the film, but I confess that part of the reason why I was astonished with how Sully, as he was nicknamed, reacted was because I don't trust that I would have such strong instincts in that moment. And I guess I'm going to give a sort of personal anecdote here. So when I was in my early 20s, I suffered from quite debilitating panic attacks. And when I found myself in the type of situations that you're describing, so high stakes, unfamiliar, the stress would lead to a physiological reaction within me, and I would actually start hyperventilating. Now, I'm very lucky I got professional support and I've managed to overcome that. But although that's an extreme reaction to stress, I think many people react to stress, however that is, and I think it's very difficult in that moment to practice deliberate calm. So what would be your advice to somebody who's listening and going, yeah, what Sully did was amazing, but I struggle to just breathe. Tell me what to do.
Yeah. Now, well, I want to also make it very clear. If you have serious challenges and issues, I would say go and see a professional. Right?
I would agree.
But we're talking for a large part of the people who are listening, for which this can be very helpful. But of course, that doesn't mean you shouldn't get professional care. But what can you do? So this is actually, it starts with building awareness. Building awareness for your own, we talk about triggers sometimes, but what is getting you into a stressful situation, and what are they? And sometimes they are, we have a protocol in the back of the book as well. If you follow yourself for a couple of weeks and you write down any moment that you feel stressed and you reflect on what's going on in my brain, in my mind, what am I thinking, how am I feeling physically, because it's a whole body of situation. Everything impacts how you feel. And what is my behavior as a result? And if you start tracking that, at the end of the day, you also look at the pattern during the day. And if you do that for a couple of weeks, you start actually become more aware of those moments that you feel stressed. And you can also start seeing a pattern. And that's just step one. First is because a lot of this happens without us being aware.
Yes. Yes.
And if we become more aware, well, then that's where you then can apply the other techniques that we talk about, because then you can actually, and that's when we talk about, you can intervene. Awareness is one. Then you can create a pause, and in that pause you can intervene. And that can mean a long pause where you really you say, okay, I need to take a time out, and I'm going to reflect, and I'm going to take notes, but you do not always have that, right? That luxury. And sometimes it means, indeed, applying breathing exercises on the spot.
Yeah.
Or other exercises.
it's such great advice. And, you know, one of the things that I want for listeners of this podcast is that everybody can take away that actionable tip. I kind of said that at the beginning. And I think pause before reacting is a great example of an actionable tip that we can all take away. It's something that I try to remember myself, and being quite honest, at one point, I actually had a Post-it above my computer monitor saying pause, quite genuinely, to remind myself. I'm a big believer in those little Post-its to remind ourselves when we're in the moment. But I was fascinated by something that you call the ripple effect of fear. Can you tell me a bit more about this and why people managers should be aware of it?
Yeah, no, it's a very relevant topic. So the ripple effect of fear, or the domino effect that we talk about, is basically if you feel under pressure and you actually are not able to regulate your emotions, you put stress on others. So if you're challenged because there is a particular deadline or something you need to do before next week, but you're scared to speak up as a leader, and therefore, and also you're scared to show that actually this is a bit too high of a high bar, and you can't push back, and as a result, you're taking it all in, and then subsequently put the pressure on your own team. Yeah. And then the team is under pressure, and that, you know, and it cascades down. Or you're having a bad day and a little thing happens and you're shouting at somebody. And we all, Sarah, I'm the last one to say that I've never shouted, right? I'm doing that as well. And it's difficult not to sometimes. But what is very important is, of course, if it happens, then to make amends, right? To make sure you have a conversation. But what is more important, that you start becoming aware. Yeah. And in the moment that you can catch sometimes I call it catch the arrow. Yeah. So that is deliberate common action. You see that you're actually going through this challenge. You don't always need to do something about it. You can just park it and say, okay, the pause that you just talked about, sometimes that's the best thing to do.
Yeah.
But we feel we need to always immediately respond. Even if you have an opportunity, sleep on a couple of things, a couple of nights, and then the answer sometimes comes. And that is, trying to stop the cascading effect of not only the pressure that is put on you, but sometimes it's not even the pressure that's put on you. It is you put the pressure on yourself because whatever you interpret as something I need to do. So it's constant work.
This is so true, and it's really fantastic advice, because the job of a people manager is a really difficult job. And it really can be stressful. So I would recommend, quite genuinely, your book has fantastic advice. So if you are a people manager, I highly recommend the book Deliberate Calm. But I do think that most people managers come from a good place. They have positive intentions. And when they do maybe cascade stress or negativity throughout the organization, it's inadvertent. So it might be through not having that opportunity to read books like Deliberate Calm and to learn what they can do, to learn how to pause. But of course, that can lead to real issues. And I'm going to move away from the book and talk to you in your role as the co-lead of the McKinsey Health Institute for a second. You published a report, it was last year now, on the impact of toxic behaviour in the workplace. Now, that's a very loaded word, and I'm aware that word toxic is very loaded, and I probably would reiterate the fact that most people managers have got positive intentions, and should things turn to toxic behaviours, it does tend to be inadvertent. But it would be great if you could tell me a little bit more about that report and about the impact of those toxic behaviours in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. So indeed, as one of the co-leaders at the McKinsey Health Institute, I look after employee health and well-being. And the report that we brought out last year was around April. That was a report that was based on a survey that went to 15 countries. Wow. And the 15 countries, in those 15 countries, we surveyed HR leaders, but also employees. So we looked at the employee experience. And this year we will go out to 28 countries. So we will continue that research. And we were very surprised. First of all, we saw that 1 out of 4 indicates to experience burnout symptoms. 1 out of 3 experience to feel distress. But one of the key drivers of burnout symptoms was this toxic workplace behavior. And what really surprised us that 1 out of 4 indicates to experience that.
Wow.
Which is very high. And I agree with you. It's a hypothesis that we have, is that, not everybody goes to work to show toxic workplace behavior or be a bad person. But we also think, there may be a group of people that have bad intent and show bad behavior. But the majority, I would expect, go with great intent, and sometimes there's bad behavior. And at the same time, I want to emphasize a lot of the opportunity at team level on this topic sits within the dynamic between people. So even if the intent is positive and the behavior is maybe not even that bad, it may also be the context of the receiving end that then makes it a bad experience. It's a misunderstanding between people. So deliberate calm, I would say, is important for team leaders, but also for team members. I would say it's for everybody relevant.
I'm going to turn to your other book because I think it's quite relevant at this stage, and that's authentic confidence.
Yeah.
And I think this goes back to the point that you've made, in that I think we both believe that people managers generally are trying to do their best, but they're facing many challenges. And there's a challenge you talk about in here which really resonates with me, and I'm sure it will resonate with many people managers. And you say that a key characteristic of senior leaders is that they are plagued by self-doubt and self-criticism and tend to demand too much of themselves. Now, I am definitely plagued by self-doubt and self-criticism. My inner critic is quite loud. Arianna Huffington, who is one of my heroines, she has described our inner critics as our obnoxious roommate living in our heads. And I have to say, my roommate is particularly obnoxious. She talks to me in a way that I would never dream of talking to somebody else. But what's really interesting is I know I'm not alone. So I've chatted to colleagues about this. I've chatted to friends about this. And I think that can lead, that inner self-critic, to lower self-confidence, which of course might lead to some of the behaviours that you've been describing. And what's interesting about your book, Authentic Confidence, is that you actually give tips on how to become a more confident person and a more confident leader. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. And yes, we saw it also in our exploratory research. This is, you're definitely not alone.
Good.
For
well,
one,
not good,
we're
actually.
100% on this table already, but the research that we did showed on average for the sample that we had, 1 out of 2 actually think they can perform better at work if they were less worried about making mistakes. And also a large part, 40% of the group worries a couple of hours a day. But then if you look at younger professionals, the number goes up, the numbers go up. And sometimes it's also unconsciously, right? Some behavior, that's all about the awareness that we spoke about. Sometimes behavior comes from insecurity, but we're not even aware. Confidence, what can I say about that? It's very important for our performance, but we emphasize in our book that we are talking about authentic confidence, because it is not so much about shutting down the inner critic per se, but it is about actually giving him or her a place and not the power that it sometimes wants to have. And it is also about being okay with being insecure. So I don't know all the answer. I may still have this insight right now that I hope Sarah's not going to ask me a difficult question because maybe I don't know the answer. And then,
So will I scratch the theory of relativity then?
Let's do that. Let's skip it. And then how do I deal with this, right? And then it's about being comfortable by, being who you are.
Yeah.
I don't know the answers to everything, and therefore we have you here. You can give the answers to my blind spots, and this is also where we're going with the teamwork. In the new world of work, where we have experts coming together, but leaders do not know all the answers. In the old world, leaders always had all the answers because they grew up within the firm, within an organization, and they had seen it all. It's not possible anymore. But authentic confidence is being okay with not being okay, and that is a first step already to calming yourself down. And it's not about shutting out that inner critic. If you want to do that, it actually gets worse.
Interesting.
You cannot... and I always, when I do a workshop with people, sometimes people say, you know, I have this inner voice. My inner voice is that I'm not good enough. And people don't want to have that inner voice. So they want to cut that thought out. And I use this funny intervention that's based on research where I said, okay, can anybody, now we're going to do a test for the next 30 seconds. No, we're not going to think about a white polar bear. And then if you think about a white polar bear, you stand up. Now in 10 seconds, everybody stands up and so on. There are always a few that sit, that sits very sternly still on the chair. And I said, you know, then they say they distracted themselves. They didn't think about something. And some of them then say, I think about a red car, and therefore I didn't think about a white polar bear. And what happens, and that is research, relational frame theory explains that as well. We cannot not think thoughts. 5 seconds later, you think about a white polar bear in a red car. Because we start making connections. And the more we do not want to think about something, we make new connections about the same thing. And so more opportunity for this thought to come up. And so the trick is actually, that's what acceptance and commitment theory teaches us, which is the basis of that book, is that you distance yourself from your thoughts, the techniques in there, and that you also allow it to be with you. So I'm sitting here in this interview with you, with the good, the bad, and the ugly, whatever is going on in my brain, and that's fine. It's not always fun, though, but it's okay.
I think that is wonderful advice. And it's so true. If we over-fixate on what not to think, as you say, don't think about white polar bears. And of course, we think about white polar bears. So hugely, hugely interesting. And you mentioned an intervention that you do with your team. Of course, you're a highly accomplished and experienced business leader. Can you tell me what else you do to support your team and their well-being?
Oh gosh, you give me big shoes there. I don't know if I feel like how you just described me. So what I try to do with the teams that I work, well, sometimes it's not even on purpose, but I try to role model vulnerability. I try to have open conversations, and I try to, what's very important, create an environment where people can be who they are and can share what they want to share. Have time for each other, and actually we don't have a lot of time these days because it's rushing. It's always there's a lot going on. And I think also when we talk about mental health and well-being, somebody told me recently that I wasn't aware, but I tend to say the magic of this topic happens at the team level. And a lot of the magic does happen at the team level. Yes, you can create an environment at work, of course, with the right help and support when you need it, and a culture where people feel safe, and where we reduce stigma around mental health and well-being. But the solution of the challenges where it really needs to happen is at the team level, where you need to create flexibility for people to find help or to get them help. And it doesn't need to be a big thing. It can be something like, my doctor's appointment has moved. I now need to move it to another day, and can we help each other out? If we are not flexible there, that causes a lot of stress down the line and so on, right? And that is where it already starts. But I think the most important thing is I really, I wish we could be more compassionate. I like kindness. I like, yes, we need to make sure we perform, but also in a human way. That's also, everybody does their best. And so that's a very important element for how I collaborate with people.
I couldn't agree more. You said so much in that really resonates with me. You talked about the importance actually as a leader of showing vulnerability, and you talked about allowing people to bring their true selves to work. And I feel for so long, people felt that they needed to put a mask up and they needed to be something different. And I know, if I'm being honest about myself, I shared with you earlier that I suffered from quite debilitating panic attacks. I hid that in my closet, and I wasn't telling anyone, lest that impact my career. I actually only started talking about it probably in the first 12 to 18 months. And I talk about it to sort of support others who may be going through that now. But I'm going to sort of circle right back to the beginning of this discussion, because I started by asking you the scientific way, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your life satisfaction nowadays? And you said 8, so you're in a really great place. That's above average. Have you always been at an 8, or what has been your journey to get to this place?
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge you also to say thank you for sharing your story, because that's also where we bonded as well, and it's so powerful. So thank you for doing that. So no, definitely, I haven't always been an 8, and by the way, I'm not every day an 8 today. This goes up and down, but I was really not in a great space about 7, 8 years ago.
Okay.
Where I went through, I have called it later a confidence crisis.
Okay. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, and that was, I did a TED Talk about it as well, because I started to talk about it at some point. But there was a phase where, for me, I changed. There was a lot of change happening in my life. And I also changed career, I changed role, and there was this increased. I mean, I always had low-grade anxiety my whole life. I just have also that personality, but I managed it well up till to that point by just working harder and doing my best and trying to not make mistakes and showing that.
At least, so you managed it by being a perfectionist.
Yeah. Yeah, just by acting as being a perfectionist, trying to do the best thing, and hide mistakes, of course. It's an expert mindset. I like that as well, and I want to do a good job, and I want to be the good girl. Maybe I don't know what it was, but I want to be do well. And I definitely, in that phase in my life, I didn't want people to regret that they hired me. I thought, okay, I want to make sure that they are.
And isn't that such an awful thing to think?
Yeah.
That's the obnoxious roommate living in your head.
Oh, I have multiple.
Telling you that.
And that one was one, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I coped with that feeling and that mindset by just working harder and harder, and I didn't share it. I also didn't sleep. I didn't sleep enough. I didn't know actually that sleep is so important. I learned that later. And then, no surprise, I was actually getting panic attacks, secret panic attacks, but also I would freeze in meetings. And what was very frustrating is that it worked the other way. I mean, even simple questions I couldn't have answers to. And so the stress was completely shutting down my brain, basically. And then and that was a phase that I went through, and I decided at some point that I wanted to do something. It was a very strong thing that came from the inside, that I had to do something about this. This was going to be something I wanted to work at, and I wanted to do it in the context where I was. Yeah. I didn't want to walk away from it. And that's how I went on my journey, studying this topic and writing about it and so on. Yeah.
So and first of all, thank you for sharing, because that is so personal, and we have met before, so we have shared our stories personally, but hopefully it can be helpful to share them with others in this way. I would recommend your TED Talk. I think it was really, really interesting, but you describe a lot of tendencies that we all fall into the trap of. I'm stressed, I'm feeling like I'm not good enough, so what's the answer? I'll work harder, I'll get less sleep, everything I do will be perfect. And that sort of seems to be the perfect storm. where actually what we need to do is step back. We need to make sure we're looking after ourselves. And we know this, we all know this, that we need to eat better, we need to get out and get fresh air, we need to sleep more.
Yeah.
And at the exact point when we know that's what we need, we tell ourselves, but I don't have time. I don't have time, so I'm going to work all these extra hours. And it sounds like that's what happened to you, Jackie. Is that fair?
Yeah. Oh, Sarah, I can even tell you a funny example now. You think, gosh, you can cry about it or you can laugh about it. It went so far that I actually, even a silly thing is that my nail polish had to match my clothes. And so I would at 2 o'clock. Yeah, I love it. It's beautiful. But literally, I remember a night where I would come home very late, and the next day I had an important meeting, and I would change my nail, and my nails were not looking well, and I would at 1 o'clock still do my nails, right? I mean,
and nobody would notice. It's only us. We have a chip in our nail. It's only us that notices. So what was your turning point? Because you're describing behaviors that so many people will relate to. What was the turning point? Was it when you started researching this, when you started studying this? Where was that moment in time?
The turning point for deciding I want to do something about it was very vividly during a moment actually that it was at work where it happened again. I thought if I continue this, then it's not. I cannot fulfill my own potential. I very clearly felt that, and I thought, if I act as if it's not there, then I'm going to fail and it gets worse. If I walk away, then I've not learned something, and so now I'm going to do something about it. And a couple of things that I did was starting to talk about it, which, by the way, if I may take a detour, I'm not saying everybody should talk about it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right?
Because talk what you're comfortable about.
Stigma is real. Stigma is real, and there's a lot of research there. But for me, I was ready for any consequences, because I thought, okay, if this is going to be my purpose, these lemons are thrown at me, let's see how I can make lemonade out of this. And if anything, I at least learn from it myself. And that has happened. I learned from it myself, and through that, I also wanted to give back. But when I started to talk about it, there were people who also commented that, and I say that also in my TED Talk, there's a group of people that said, this is amazing. I also feel this, and I'm glad that somebody's talking about it so we can actually bring this, destigmatize the topic around this. And this was, way before the pandemic. So we talk a bit more about these things right now. But there was also a group of people that said, are you not afraid that this will harm your career? Mm-hmm. And yes, I had thought about that, but I couldn't give anything about it anymore. I really thought, okay, whatever it is, I'm ready to face it. And then that's the inner courage that I then get. It became a purpose. But also slowly but surely I started to learn I was not alone, because I thought I was alone, and I was, it's a weakness, and I felt ashamed as well of it. And then I realized I'm not alone. And then I thought, okay, if it's not a weakness, what is actually the science behind it? Apart from the behavioral and the psychological science, I said I want to know what's happening in the brain and the body. And that's how I started to study the neuroscience. And I got another, as you know, I went back to university, and I got a degree in affective neuroscience. And that's where I was already on that journey, being kinder to myself. And I'm a big fan of self-compassion. I followed a workshop with Kristen Neff as well. It was a huge unlock for me. But when I actually started to learn about the biology and the neuroscience behind it, that really all put it together. I thought, okay, what are we doing to ourselves? Yeah. Right? And why do we stigmatize this? And why do we think it's a weakness? There is actually a very clear explanation. And that has helped me as well, Sarah, to explain this content for boardrooms that actually are not ready yet for the soft stuff. They first need to actually feel comfortable that there is science. Yes. And then they can leave that aside and be open for talking about the softer stuff, because they feel safe with it. Sometimes it's a safer way, right, to open up your brain for it.
And this is actually, it brings me back to, because both books, you go in different levels into the science. So there's not time to go into that now, but if you are interested listening in the science, in neuroscience, there is a lot in these books, and obviously there's many others as well. But that sort of brings us to, I like to finish with a rapid fire round, and like a quiz show host. Actually, I think this brings me nicely to the first question. So the first question is, when you're having a challenging day or a challenging week, what rituals do you put in place to support your own well-being?
Yeah, I have a couple of non-negotiables that I think about. No matter what, if it rains or not, and if I feel bad or not, I go out for a walk. Great. Walking is my best habit, basically. It's my savior. And so I find time to walk, no matter what.
What's the best job that you've ever worked in, thinking about the perspective of your well-being?
I think I'm currently in it. I've been lucky to have been in many jobs. But the thing is, why I'm hesitating is that I work a lot and I work hard. Yet, because of its purpose, it's the best job for health and well-being.
So purpose, that's really interesting. The thing that drives your well-being, well, there's obviously many things, but in a work situation, is you're looking to work in a role that gives you a sense of purpose.
Absolutely, and the people that I work with. So one of the things I would say to everybody, find your purpose and work with the people you really like and the people you feel you can be at your best. And I've been lucky to have many of those jobs through my life, but currently I also want to confirm I am in one. So and then you can have a lot.
Your best job is all about a job with purpose, with people. Aristotle believed that the ultimate goal of life, of course, was purpose, or eudaimonic well-being, or eudaimonic happiness, as Aristotle would have said. Would that then mean that your least enjoyable job from a well-being perspective might be something where you lacked purpose?
Yes. So it has been a job where I rationally chose a direction and rationally chose for a job that I thought was something that was popular, and it was the right job to do because my dad did something in the same space, but it was not where my heart was. Yeah. And so yes, absolutely, for me it is, and I have had that experience. Yeah.
Well, Jackie, it has been such a pleasure. You have provided so many actionable tips that we can all take to improve our own well-being, but also to improve the well-being of our colleagues, because we're all working with many people and lead multifaceted lives. So a huge thank you for coming on the Working on Wellbeing podcast.
Thank you, Sarah, for asking these great questions. That's where the magic came from. So,
well, the magic came from your books.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.